Now we are going to move into the main event of dinner this evening with General Hayden. I am going to introduce Professor Kagan once again, who will be doing the introduction for the General. I have not had as many personal interactions as Mr. Lizardo with the professor, but there is no doubt that he has been an incredible friend and mentor of the Buckley program from its origin, and has continued to serve as an example of what a relationship between a professor and students in a modern university can look like. He is Sterling Professor Emeritus of Classics and History at Yale University, where he taught for more than 40 years. A former Dean of Yale College, Professor Kagan earned his master's degree in classics from Brown University and his doctoral degree in history from Ohio State University in 1958. Before coming to Yale in 1969, Kagan taught at Pennsylvania State University and Cornell University. From 1988 to 93, Kagan served as a member of the National Council on the Humanities. His many publications include On the Origins of War and the Preservation of Peace, The Peloponnesian War, and Thucydides' The Reinvention of History. He was awarded a National Humanities Medal by President Bush in 2002, and in 2005 delivered the 34th Jefferson Lecture in the Humanities, the highest honor the federal government bestows for distinguished intellectual and public achievement in the humanities. With no further ado, Professor Kagan.
Thank you very much. The notion that I would one day be an enthusiastic member of an organization dedicated to the memory of William Buckley would have astonished me those many, many years ago when I first met William Buckley. We were on opposite sides of a debate at Cornell University. And if you had told me that I would be doing this now, I don't know whether I would have laughed or screamed. But over the years, I grew wiser. And I got to know him in other ways as well, and to admire him enormously. And I feel it's a great honor to be associated with the organization that bears his name. So let me say good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and to speak on behalf of the Buckley program at Yale, it is my privilege and my great pleasure to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, General Michael Hayden. Michael Hayden is a retired United States Air Force four-star general, former director of the National Security Agency, and director of the Central Intelligence Agency. For about a year, he was also the principal deputy director of national intelligence, a position which once made him, as somebody said, the highest-ranking military intelligence officer in the armed forces. And on the seventh day, he rested. On July 1st, 2008, General Hayden retired from the Air Force after nearly 39 years of active duty military service and continued to serve as director of the CIA until the 12th of February of 2009. He's currently a principal of the Chertoff Group, a security consultancy co-founded by former Homeland Secretary Michael Chertoff. He also serves as the distinguished visiting professor at George Mason University School of Public Policy and as a member of the board of directors of Motorola Solutions. The Buckley program is honored and delighted to welcome you, sir, General Hayden, and to hear your keynote address.
Dr. Thank you very much. Very generous. Seventh day arrested you. Nice touch. Thank you to the Buckley program. And Lauren, thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. The 50th anniversary of James Burnham's book, Suicide of the West. I feel a little bit like a preacher, all right, because I'm going to quote from Scripture here, except the Scripture's from the book, okay? It is from Burnham, so these are my biblical texts around which my homily will be formed, okay? The first one, oh, by the way, and I recognize that James Burnham was talking about the Cold War, but as Ibn Warwick told us this afternoon, an awful lot of his observations about the Cold War carry forward to our current circumstances. So here are the two texts from his book. Number one, kind of an external point of view. What is required is a, quote, renewed willingness to use superior power and the threat of power to defend the West. And then the second, kind of more inward facing, in order to do that, we have got to do that in the face of internal forces anchored on concepts of, and here I'm quoting, guilt and self-criticism amounting to self-hatred. Okay? Now, Burnham in general was talking about the West, but I'm an American, this is an American audience. I'm going to be largely focused on how those two passages are reflected in contemporary American history, the United States within the West, and then the internal debate within the United States, all right? Now, I've already just, you know, the West is a large concept. We're heirs to a great cultural tradition. There are many nations and peoples who are part of that arc of history, and I've pulled the Americans out because we're Americans and we're sitting here in Connecticut. That almost invites the question of American exceptionalism. I mean, why am I talking about the Americans or other elements of Western society? So let me just spend a minute here talking about my experience with American exceptionalism. I'm, as the professor said, almost 40 years in the Air Force, so I've been to a lot of places. Hardly ever was it on the upside of going in position to say, I'm an American, I'm exceptional, all right? And so I've struggled with the concept. I really have. I really have. Until a morning very much like today. I was walking around campus with my wife, Janine, who's with me here tonight. It reminded me of this day almost 20 years ago to the day when I was in Sarajevo in Bosnia during the war there that resulted in the disintegration of Yugoslavia. And I was there, it's actually February of '94. And I was there in Sarajevo. I was the chief of intelligence for U.S. forces in Korea. And we were doing, U.S. forces in Korea, U.S. forces in Europe, thank you. And we were there to kind of take notes, to try to inform American policy. And we went to the marketplace in central Sarajevo that had actually been hit by a 120 millimeter mortar the Saturday before. And this is a 1 in 1,000 shot. The market's surrounded by fairly high buildings. And Sarajevo, even then, was a fairly modern city. And this thing was shot in a very high arc trajectory. It should never have been able to get down into the marketplace, but it did. One mortar round. And if you kind of picture going to markets around here, you got those tents that have got steel framing on them, you know, that kind of keep the stalls protected. Well, this thing came down, and it appears as if the mortar actually hit the steel framework of one of those tents, which meant it detonated at about 6 feet, 8 feet in the air, and of course blew its shrapnel all around. And anyway, we're at the market. It's got an asphalt floor there, and I can see the holes in the asphalt from the fragments from the mortar. There were dozens of people killed. There were Sarajevans under siege, going to market, buying black market goods to feed their families. Dozens killed. And I'm there just kind of absorbing it. And I'm there in my American military uniform, battle dress, kind of, we call battle rattle, you know, Kevlar, parka, helmet, weapon, and the American flag on the shoulder. And I'm there just walking around looking at the pock marks on the asphalt. And the Sarajevians kind of notice. And they come up, start looking at me, and start looking at that sleeve, and start recognizing that patch, kind of going, USA. USA. And it was almost prayerful. USA. And then a group gathered around and we chatted for a few minutes. It was at that point that I discovered or learned or confirmed that it really didn't matter whether or not I thought we were exceptional. Everyone else does. And look, we can, over beer and pizza, understand there's good pizza in New Haven, all right? Over beer and pizza, we can talk whether that's a welcome thing, whether we deserve it, whether we want it. We can have that discussion. But the fact of the matter is, we got it. And the only thing we can expect from history is that someday when we don't have it anymore, when it's not our turn, that history simply reflects that, you know, as global hegemons, these Americans weren't bad. But that's about as good as we can expect it to end up. So, what we do is important. And again, we may not want it, we may not have earned it, but it is really, really important, and it's unavoidable. So let me take those two passages, that use of superior power and the threat of power to defend the West, and then guilt and self-criticism. And let's apply them to our experience then as Americans. So let's do the external element first, okay? How do we play with the rest of the Western world? The Americans and the rest of the West. I went to the German embassy in the spring of 2007. I've been in the seat at CIA for about a year. The Germans were in the chair of the EU at this point. And Ambassador Sherryroth, who was a great friend of the United States, would have, I have to say this carefully to get it right, would have the ambassadors of the states of the European Union to the United States over for lunch. And he'd do it about every 2 weeks, and they'd talk Euro things, but every now and again he'd have an American come to be kind of the lunchtime entertainment. Okay? So I'm sure Condi went, I think Bob Gates was there. In any event, in this event he invites the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. So I kind of had the thought, well, it's pretty unusual. I get to talk to all of our European allies all at once. And it's going to be a good meal. I know it's going to be a good meal. The ambassador always puts on a good spread. So I should really say something interesting. I should really pay my host back for inviting me to the dinner, to the lunch. So I said, I'll tell you what, Mr. Ambassador, let me talk about renditions, detentions, and interrogations to the states of the European Union, okay? So I got a great staff at CIA, I really did. And, you know, what's the second greatest temptation of mankind is to work with somebody else's prose and change it, right? So I could never resist it with my speeches. But this one, I actually began to play with it when it was kind of a blank sheet, because I felt this was a really important conversation to have. And I still remember, and you can tell I remember because I'm going to quote me in a minute, I can still remember what I said about 2 or 3 pages into the speech. I said, look, let's play with our cards face up. Let me tell you what I believe, my agency believes, my government believes, and what my nation believes. We are a nation at war. We are at war with Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. This war is global in scope, and I can only fulfill my legal and moral responsibilities to my citizens by taking this war to that enemy wherever they may be. 4 sentences. War, global, Al-Qaeda, take the fight. There was not another country in that room who agreed with any of those 4 sentences. They not only rejected them for themselves, which is somewhat understandable, they felt they were illegitimate for us, that we were actually misreading international law. Again, we're talking about the U.S. and the rest of the West. I'm there kind of building up after that. Let me tell you what we believe, talking about what CIA was doing. I'm standing up here, Ambassador Sherroth is sitting next to me, and he turns up and looks and says, well, General, I mean, you have to admit, we're all children of the Enlightenment. Having a wonderful Catholic liberal arts education, I actually know a little bit about philosophy. And I said, yes, sir, Mr. Ambassador, I fully agree, but you guys are fixated on Locke, and we're kind of into Hobbes. At the very end, it was actually, I mean, it was everything I would want it to be. It was a candid exchange with people who indeed are our friends, but whose view of the legitimacy and the utility of the use of force in international relations has dramatically diverged from that of the United States. That was papered over in the Bush administration because of American style points. You know, you're either for us or against it, with us or against us. Old Europe, New Europe. The Europeans could go pout and pretend that, you know, we're insulted, we're not going to play. All right? But fundamentally, that papered over what has become, I actually think, an incredibly different viewpoint. And again, with regard to the use of force. At the very end of the lunch, we did some Q&A, and I said, well, look, it's been fun. I've really enjoyed it. I'm going to go back in my Suburban here. My guys are going to drive me across the Potomac. I'm going to go to my headquarters. And by the way, if I walk into my office and I got a folder on my desk that we got somebody, I got three choices. I can keep them. That's a black site. I can give them to a friend. That's a rendition. Or I can give them to Don Rumsfeld. That's Guantanamo. The point is, I only got three choices. I'm not helped by your crossing your arms and clucking at me from some perceived sense of moral superiority. All right. I didn't, wait. I didn't say that. I thought it. In September of 2009, because here's the point I want to make. I'm going to make some distinctions with the current administration and past administrations, all right? But the point I want to make here right now is a continuity. There are more differences between 43.1 and 43.2 when it comes to the global war on terrorism than there are between 43 and 44. Okay? We did more adjustments between the first and second Bush administrations than we did between the Bush and the Obama administration. Now I'll get to some fine print later and go ahead and make, register some complaints. But you need to understand that what I'm describing to you here is an American attitude and not narrowly confined to just a Republican administration. September 2009, American Special Forces, helicopter-borne, take off from a carrier, go into Somalia, don't even dismount, use organic weapons on the helicopter, and kill a fellow named Salah Nabhan. Salah Nabhan is the operations chief for Al-Qaeda in Somalia, Al-Shabaab. Okay? The helicopter lands just long enough to swab up enough of Salah so they can take the DNA samples back to the ship and make sure they've got the right guy. Okay? This is current administration. This is September of 2009. Okay? There is not an intelligence service in Western Europe who would have given me information to enable that action had they even suspected that's the use to which we would have put that information. Are you getting the point here? We have within the broad sweep of Western society fundamental differences, again, about the utility and legitimacy of the use of force. And going back to Burnham's quote, a willingness to use superior power and the threat of power to defend the West. So President Obama gets elected and wins the Nobel Peace Prize. I wasn't far out of government. I still wasn't sleeping through the night all night. I got up, I turned on, where's KT? It was Fox. Oh, you know, just comes up to Fox, KT. It's just the way it is. All right? And I see the crawler, President Obama awarded Nobel Peace Prize, okay? I thought I was watching Red Eye and Greg Gutfeld, okay? But no, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for not being George Bush. Now, I actually think it embarrassed President Obama a bit. And again, talking about continuity here, all right? I'm going to get the differences, hold on, but talking about continuity, President Obama's acceptance speech in Oslo for the Nobel Prize was a remarkable speech. I mean, I actually remember watching part of it. And the president was kind of here at the podium, and the camera is kind of up there. So you're looking down over the president's shoulder, and you all hear the Nobel Committee, okay? As he's going through his acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize for not being George Bush. In other words, being like them, okay? The President of the United States, the 44th President of these United States, is lecturing the Nobel Committee on just war theory and on his responsibility to defend the citizens of the American Republic. That camera angle over his shoulder out to the crowd, y'all look like your dogs had just been run over by buses. And somebody just tweeted you that, you know, Rover's dead. Okay. More recently, and James brought Snowden up today and the reaction in Germany and all that, there was a wonderful quote in Spiegel, the German weekly, after Snowden kind of blew and where you were, weren't you, and Angela Merkel and so on. A wonderful quote in Spiegel in which a prominent German, and I apologize, I don't remember the name, but I remember the quote. A prominent German said, "We thought there were always two Americas. We thought it was George Bush. And now we know there is just one America." I hope he's right. So, you've got this question within the West, and our view being somewhat at variance with many of our traditional allies. Let's look within us, because despite all the things I've said here about President Obama and President Bush and continuity, this is not a claim that President Obama was, one, representing a universally held American position in some of these views. And there are times, frankly, when I'm not sure that President Obama is representing a coherent position for himself in some of these discussions, because there seems to be some contradiction. Do you all remember the speech at NDU, the National Defense University? It's about 18 months ago now. This is when we thought, you know, the tide of war was receding, Al-Qaeda was on the run, and it was time to do some nation building at home. So the president gives a major speech at NDU. I actually had some background on this. I mean, I've been out of government almost 6 years, but I knew this speech was a building, and he was looking for an opportunity to give it. And there were a couple of false starts where, you know, we thought he was going to give it, but, you know, the stars weren't quite aligned. In any event, he wants to give the speech, and it is a very personal speech. This is a speech, a presidential speech that lasts more than an hour. And it's given at, as I said, NDU, the National Defense University, so in front of, if not friendly, at least totally respectful audience. Now, how those Code Pink individuals got into the crowd on a U.S. military base, I do not know. Okay. But the president was interrupted twice during his speech. But even with the interruptions, it was, you know, even discounting the interruptions, it was more than an hour. And it was far more Hamlet than it was Patton. Right? I know, and I don't mean that in a critical way. This was a president struggling with the moral dilemmas of this continuing conflict and the responsibilities that were placed on him as a human being, as a person. I'm going to give you an incredibly flippant, far too irreverent summary of the speech, but it is not inaccurate. When it got all done, you could boil that 1 hour down, 1 hour and 5 minutes down to these sentences. You know, I ended up being pretty much like the other guy. But I'm bothered by that. When we get to these debates inside of our country, and these are serious debates, and you probably detected the note that I understand I'm multiple octaves below where he is, but I understand the kind of balancing that the human being Barack Obama was trying to do, okay? When these debates happen in our society, we very often don't help ourselves because there is a default option going back to Burnham's thing about guilt and self-criticism amounting to hatred. There is a default option where we turn these debates into some discussions about the forces of light versus the forces of darkness, the forces of good versus the forces of evil. When in most cases in mature Western democracies, and I get it, security forces can go off the rails even in mature Western democracies, all right? But fundamentally, what we are debating here in the United States is not good versus evil. It's good versus good. We are attempting to balance two things that are virtues, our liberty and our security. You know, I've been in these debates, and I get accused of running roughshod over the Constitution. And the Constitution was designed to protect us from the kind of tyranny we saw under George III. I've actually had that used on me. Actually, if you actually study history, okay, here's a sequence of events. It's George III, overbearing, Articles of Confederation, government not competent enough to defend us, Constitution of the United States, we got to tighten it up here. I want a government with some strength. Bill of Rights, let's tack it back a little bit in the other direction. Okay? Really, I mean, it's kind of this Hamiltonian Jefferson thing going on, you know, at the end of the 18th and into the beginning of the 19th century. This is an argument between virtues. If you look at the foundation document, why are we doing this? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And so when people come to me, and I've heard this one before, that we should not sacrifice our values for our security, I kind of remind people that security is a value. That security... That security is one of the three things we did this thing for in the first place. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So yeah, this is not the dark side and the light side. These are democracies trying to decide tough questions based upon the totality of circumstances they feel themselves in at the time. Janine and I were talking last night doing the dishes, and I was looking up the name. I'm going to make this connection. Hang on. Looking up the name of the command surgeon for U.S. forces in Europe in 1994. And we found it. It was Dr. Vern Chong. Dr. Chong, and keep in mind, U.S. Forces Europe, headquartered at Stuttgart, Germany. All right? It's a 2 to 3 year tour. That's 5 to 10 kilos. All right? Eating in Germany, 5 to 10 kilos, 2 to 3 years. Vern Chong, the command surgeon, every Friday at the staff meeting would remind us about healthy eating. Okay? And at one point, the four-star who was chairing the meeting, Chuck Boyd, Dr. Chong starts, well, now you're going to be going out here, it's Spargel season, watch the hollandaise sauce, you know, and General Boyd said, stop, Vern, stop. We get it. If it tastes good, spit it out. In my darker moments, and even kind of in my grayer moments, there are elements of American society, I believe, who are of the belief, if it defends America, it can't be right. And that's a very dark, dark thing that we have to work against in this debate about where we put the balance between things that are virtues. As we talked about today, and James mentioned, this whole debate gets accelerated by Edward Snowden and all the things he's put out there. You know, this is almost a perfect storm. I mean, let's take Snowden off the tray just for a minute and just put him back here, kind of make him pending. And now think of everything else that's on the tray. IRS, If you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan. We can't wait. Recess appointments when Congress doesn't think itself in recess. This is a perfect storm when you then get dropped the Snowden allegations into this swirl where even people who don't wear tinfoil on their heads every day are beginning to really worry about government overreach here in the United States. Okay? And then you take the way the story is released with Greenwald and Poitras and even a bit Bart Gellman from the Washington Post, although Bart's a bit more responsible. I mean, it is put out there as advocacy journalism. Where's KT again? I mean, you guys, after 7 o'clock at night, surrendered your security credentials for your Tea Party credentials. I mean, just kind of went crazy on Fox. I recall one Fox guy, remember the 215 program, the metadata program where NSA gets your phone bills? There was one reporter on Fox saying, and then, if you look suspicious, they can click on that and then find out the content of your call. Now, keep in mind what I just told you. All NSA was getting was your phone bills. Have you ever clicked on your phone bill and gotten a copy of your voice conversation? Even CIA can't make your phone bill talk. I'm just saying. I was down at Texas A&M, which actually should be kind of a more friendly audience than New Haven. And I'm doing a thing for faculty, and not A&M faculty, but security faculty that had come in for a conference. I'm actually doing the after-dinner talk. And this one professor says, well, General, I appreciate your point about intelligence, but we've given up so many of our liberties. And I just said, could you kind of list them for me? Tell me what you've given up. Okay, I got it. You got to take stuff off at the airport. We'll put that aside. What else have you given up? And I waited. And then she kind of blurted out, well, you're listening to all our calls. I said, actually, that's not true. So let's move on. What have you given up? Sorry, honest men can differ. All right, and I don't mean to resurrect a debate about where the line should be between liberty and security. I'm just telling you that it has to be an informed debate, that it has to be a debate that's respectful of all views, that this is a competition between virtues, not I'm on the side of light and they're inside of darkness. That's why strong political leadership is needed in this kind of debate. You can't let this kind of run out from under you with, the national psyche being informed by the darkest story that's been most quickly walked to the darkest story of the room by your morning newspaper or your favorite 7x24 news network. When I was at NSA, by the way, I started the 215 program. I'm the one who started with your phone bills, all right? Started on October 4th, 2001. We got trillions of them. Okay. When I was at NSA, I said I needed 3 things in order to judge whether or not we should do something. I'm doing this without slide. By the way, it's a 40-year military officer doing this without PowerPoints. A little understanding here, please, okay? But if I had a slide, I'm doing 3 little Venn circles, and one Venn circle says, is it lawful? And the other Venn thing here says, can I do it? Is it technically feasible? And the third Venn oval here says, is it relevant? I mean, is it worth doing? Okay? Lawful, feasible, worth doing. And I used to say, when I was at NSA, that space where those 3 Venns overlap, that's our business space. Because we do stuff that's lawful, appropriate, and effective. By the time I got to CIA, I realized I was lowballing this. I had left one Venn oval off the circle, off the chart. Lawful, effective, technologically feasible. The 4th Venn was politically acceptable. The 4th Venn was, if you're going to do this for a long time, it has to be based on some sense of consensus or at least permission from the political process of the United States. Look, I used to run covert action. President of the United States gets to do one-off on his say-so alone, as long as it's lawful and effective and feasible. But no president gets to do anything for a long period of time without that fourth Venn oval, politically acceptable. And that's the part where we've been kind of falling down on in our internal debate. After the NSA revelations were put out there, President Obama was correct, but fundamentally not enthusiastic in defending what security agencies were doing on your behalf. President Obama did not visit Fort Meade or the National Security Agency at any point after the Snowden revelations were made. And in fact, if you look at President Obama's speeches, it went from correct but mildly supportive words about NSA to "I feel your pain" to "we're going to make some changes," even though they're still lawful, effective, and appropriate. That's a really important thing for political leadership to do. Political leadership cannot tack with the wind when lawful, effective, and appropriate security activities are revealed and become controversial. After the NSA program was made public by the New York Times in December of 2005, President Bush went to Fort Meade in January of 2006. In effect, he said, "You're my guys, I'm your guy, I got your back, we're pushing ahead with the program." President Obama has not visited Fort Meade. If President Obama were to visit Fort Meade, he would be the first Democrat president in history to visit the National Security Agency. This internal uncertainty erodes our self-confidence, and I won't go back and read the earlier quotes from Burnham, but remember the point about guilt-ridden. And because it erodes our self-confidence, we have trouble organizing the Western coalition, the first quote from Burnham, to use our superior power and the threat of power to defend the West. This stuff comes home to roost. Let me get really current with you. 2 days ago, in Geneva, the Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights was representing the United States in front of the United Nations Committee Against Torture. And the U.S. representative at this meeting in Geneva said, quote, "A little more than 10 years ago, our government was employing interrogation methods that any fair-minded person would believe were torture, which is breaking faith with hundreds of Central Intelligence Agency officers who were responding to lawful orders from the president, activities that were briefed to Congress, activities were deemed lawful by 3 out of the 4 last attorney generals of the United States. I can think of nothing more destructive of the internal culture of your security services than to believe that when they go do things they have been told are lawful, authorized by the president, briefed to Congress, and the director of CIA says are the right things to do because they're effective, that those things then become objective felonies after the next set of elections. Things didn't turn out all that well for the administration team. Despite that admission, a little more than 10 years ago, NSA involved in, or CIA involved activities anyone would believe were torture. The Europeans then attacked the American delegation for the Army Field Manual on interrogations, for a provision in the Army Field Manual that 4 hours of sleep are guaranteed to any detainee as being insufficient, for the conditions of U.S. prisons, for the militarization of American police forces, and American treatment of undocumented immigrants. Back to the first point that Burnham makes about the West and willingness to defend itself, guilt, self-incrimination. That really gets me near the end. That's pretty depressing. So I've decided to end on a high note here. I'm from Pittsburgh. Yeah, okay. That's it. That was it. Janine and I go back for football a lot. I like Iron City. I haven't been able to pay for my Iron City beer for about 15 years. People who don't live on the Upper East Side, you know, most of our countrymen allegedly too stupid to know a bad law when they see it, those guys. Those guys instinctively know an awful lot more about balancing Jefferson and Hamilton than a lot of American political elites. You know, most of the people at the bar I go to, I'm pretty sure have not read Burnham, but they get it. Thank you very much.